I'd been eyeing a new VR headset for months, scrolling through endless reviews, waiting for a good deal to pop up. Then, one night, as I was mindlessly browsing, an ad appeared. A sleek, top-of-the-line VR headset, unlike anything I'd seen, for less than half the usual price. The ad led to a site I didn't recognize, something with a URL that looked like it was just a jumble of random letters. But the product pictures were enticing. The headset looked almost futuristic, streamlined in black and silver, and the site boasted specs that made it sound too good to be true. I knew I should be cautious. There were no customer reviews, and the About Us page was practically blank, just a generic paragraph about enhancing digital experiences. Still, every rational part of me was drowned out by the thrill of getting my hands on something this advanced, and I convinced myself it was worth the risk. After all, if it was legit, I'd be getting the best VR experience money could buy. Worst case, I'd lose a few bucks. Without letting myself think too much about it, I went through the checkout, entered my details, and hit order. When the package finally arrived, I have to admit I was a little disappointed. The headset looked a bit cheap, nowhere near as sleek as the photos on the website had made it seem. The plastic was flimsy, the finish wasn't quite right, and there were no logos or branding anywhere. Still, I was too excited to let that stop me. I'd been waiting for days, and I couldn't resist diving in right away. I powered it on, strapped it to my head, and selected the first option that popped up. Immersive environment. Almost instantly, I found myself standing in what looked exactly like my own apartment. Every detail was spot on, from the faint coffee stain on my carpet to the small chip on my coffee table. Even the light coming through the windows was perfectly angled, just like it was in real life at that moment. First, I laughed. I figured this was just part of the calibration, mapping my space to enhance the immersion. But as I moved around, it felt eerily real. There was an uncanny accuracy to it, almost as if I was still in my apartment but with a strange layer of separation, like a slightly warped mirror. I waved it off as impressive tech, a cool trick of the VR world. Still, a small part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After the first session, I couldn't stop thinking about how real it had all felt. The headset had somehow mapped my apartment with an almost unsettling precision, but I brushed it off, thinking it was just part of the cutting-edge tech. So, naturally, I put it back on the next day, ready to be amazed again. This time, though, something felt wrong. As soon as I powered it on, the familiar surroundings of my apartment materialized. But there was a dimness in the air, a heavy shadow clinging to the corners. It was subtle at first, just a trick of the light, I told myself. But then I noticed the shadows moving, like something, or someone, was lurking just out of view. I strained to see, but they always seemed to slip out of sight the moment I turned. Then the whispers started, faint and distant, just on the edge of hearing. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was background noise, some ambient sound effect. But the more I tried to focus, the clearer the voices became, like they were aware of me listening. The whispers turned into fragments of sentences, too quick for me to fully catch, but each word seemed darker, more twisted. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I caught phrases like, "He's watching," "Don't turn around," and "You'll never leave." A shiver ran down my spine, and I reached up to take off the headset, but nothing happened. The screen stayed fixed, the straps unmoving, like the device was fused to my head. I tugged harder, panic flooding my chest as the whispers grew louder, now almost taunting me. My hands started shaking as I desperately tried to pull it off, but the headset wouldn't budge. I was trapped in this twisted version of my own home, the darkness creeping closer, pressing in around me, as if it was alive. After what felt like an eternity trapped in that twisted simulation, I managed to yank the headset off, gasping for air like I'd been underwater. My apartment looked normal, but something about it felt wrong. At first, I thought it was just my nerves. I told myself it was all in my head, just a side effect of the creepy experience I'd had. But when I started noticing the little things, the feeling of unease only grew. Objects around my apartment weren't where I'd left them. My keys, usually on the kitchen counter, were in the middle of the floor. The books on my shelf were rearranged, placed in a bizarre order I'd never seen before. At one point, I found a photograph of me, taken in my own apartment, but from an angle that was impossible. It was like someone or something had been watching me from inside the simulation and had left traces behind. The worst part was the déjà vu. I'd walk down the street and suddenly recognize people I'd never met before. A man at the coffee shop looked up from his newspaper, made eye contact, and nodded like he knew me. When I asked him if we'd met, he just smiled and said, "I've seen you around." My stomach dropped. It was the exact same voice I'd heard in those whispers during the VR session. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was being followed, like parts of the VR world were bleeding into reality. Familiar shadows moved in the corners of my vision, and sometimes, late at night, I'd hear faint whispers drifting through my apartment. I couldn't tell if I was losing my mind or if something from the headset had crossed over, creeping into my world. The creeping dread became impossible to ignore. Day after day, my apartment felt less like home and more like a twisted reflection of itself. I couldn't escape the feeling that something had slipped through, that by putting on that headset, I'd opened a door that should have stayed shut. In a fit of desperation, I decided to destroy the headset. I grabbed a hammer and brought it down hard, smashing it to pieces. For a moment, I felt relief, a sliver of freedom. But the next morning, there it was again, sitting on my coffee table, completely intact, with the LED light blinking as if it were taunting me. I tried everything, burning it, burying it in the woods miles away, even tossing it into the river. But every single time, it would reappear in my apartment, perfectly unharmed and fully charged. It was like the headset was bound to me, a cursed object that wouldn't let go, no matter how hard I tried to escape. Now, I feel like a prisoner in my own life, haunted by glimpses of that shadowy world. The line between what's real and what's part of the simulation has blurred beyond recognition. Sometimes, I'll catch my reflection moving out of sync, or hear those familiar whispers when I'm alone. I live in constant fear, never knowing if what I'm seeing is real, or if it's the headset still playing tricks on my mind. And all I can think about is that moment of weakness, that split-second decision to buy from a website I didn't trust. It feels like I've traded my reality for something twisted and hollow. I know now that I'm forever trapped by the headset, by the whispers, by this unbreakable curse that started with one careless click.